Well,
Good.
all right, so we are back again. This is February, and this is Doug's third presentation with us. Doug Harding from Iowa, and we've been following a trend or a theme of the meat packing industry. We looked at packing plants, we've looked at meat processing, we've looked at all the different kinds of products that come out of a packing plant that you could actually set up other industries on that same property or ship to and from, things like that. What's left over from the, everything from the hoofs to the hump and that kind of thing. And so when Doug and I talked, he said, hey, I said, well, thanks for the two programs. And he was like, well, great, except we should do the third one, which looks at stock cars and stock yards for, the incoming process. And of course, from the plains when the cattle or whatever, pigs are picked up all the way to where they're going to be processed. So I agreed and said, yes, we should do that. And then at the same time, David Gunn, who is up in the top there from Nova Scotia, waving to us, has been working on building a plant on his on his layout, and had some questions about meat packing plants and various things that Doug's been able to do it, and then came to us and said, hey, I'm working on a stockyard for my thing. Can you give me some ideas and stuff? And hooked him up with Doug and stuff like that. And if you remember in our newsletter that just came out, there was a picture from David layout with the stockyard, which he was shocked when I sent the newsletter. And what the heck is my layout doing in your newsletter? And I said, hey, you never know. So he enjoyed the opportunity to share and didn't know it was going to happen, but I already knew it was going to happen. So anyhow, and we do, are always looking for things like that to enhance stuff. So, and he's almost got that stockyard done. So anyhow, with that, we'll go ahead and get started here in a second. We will remember that our November scheduled meeting is in Thanksgiving month, and Doug is going to be back with us in November to do our presentation on poultry cars, and as a kind of a connection to the meat packing industry too. And there's been some movement of poultry cars on some other websites, the bull shippers, and some stuff that come out of California. And so there's been some pictures recently of those cars, but it's a very interesting presentation. I've seen him do it before, and it'll make you all want to sign up to become a person that rides the poultry car and takes care of the animals, the birds and stuff like that as a retirement opportunity. So I'll leave that in suspense there for you to come and learn about that.
Guano Express.
So. Can you click on the got it?
Yes,
That's on your screen.
who's controlling it?
I got that.
And then when Doug shares his screen,
You see
we're
Doug's
good to go.
face.
I will share once the host gives me permission to share.
Doggone host does this every time.
Host is disabled participant screen sharing.
We're not as proficient at this as the Greg and the Michiana group there.
That is a
Uh-huh.
He is a master of all this stuff.
It's a matter of learning.
Yeah.
okay. I've made you the host, Doug.
Oh, good. There we go. Now I can. Let's see. Are you?
Yep.
There we go.
Okay. Now we
Let's
just
see
need,
if I can get this started. Are you still seeing the full
Yep.
screen?
yeah, we're waiting on you to bring it up to the presentation, the screen. Click on that screen button.
I did, but I'm running two screens, so that's the problem. I run into this all the time. Oh, let's see.
Yeah, to say, go down to the bottom corner there and it should be the presentation screen. Yeah, right there. What happens?
Well, it pops up on my big screen, but not on the computer screen. So,
We
I know.
can live with this, Doug.
no, we can't.
It's snowing and cold here. We can live with it.
Well, I know what to do. There, you got it.
Hey, excellent. Good job.
I just had to unplug the big screen. Anyway, the title, as you can see, Railroad Facilities for Handling Livestock at Shipping Points in the Corn Belt region. This was a publication that was a government study that was done in the 43 or 45 during the World War II period. And it looks at 10 states in the upper Midwest and the railroad facilities and for handling livestock. And I found this in the Iowa State University Library and found it to be a fascinating study. And so it became the focus of this presentation. So we're going to look at the facilities railroads had for handling livestock. Here we are in Chicago Northwestern loading cattle. This is photo from 1948. I believe this is Landers, Wyoming. And you can see the standard, what you consider a stock pen and a loading chute going up to the cars. Take note of these two boards here, or walkway on the outside of the loading chute, so that the cowboys or wranglers or whatever you want to call them can walk along here and count the cows going up or prod them along, etc. This fellow's on the inside, but he looks like he's up on some sort of an elf. Probably got a foot stuck into the fence there, so he's up above the cattle a little bit. Then we got a fellow back here who's counting, looking through the gates on either side. So from that study, it discussed the rail shipments of livestock and meat. So here's a listing. These statistics are from 1940 and then one from 1932 of the number of cattle, calves, sheep, goats, hogs being transported in cars, the tons, etc. And then we've got single deck cars as well as double deck cars. Double deck cars, they allowed you to haul more animals, basically hogs, sheep, and goats by going the wrong way. So anyway, the study looked at these 10 states here. You may recognize a state or two on the list, and the percentage of towns on railroads that had stock pens for handling livestock from 1942. What's surprising, you've got North Dakota, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa are the top 5 states. They also are major sheep and beef raising states. It also shows the importance of livestock in those areas where North Dakota, something like 96% of the towns on railroads had stock pens. In Iowa, it was about 82%. Then we started dwindling down the states that got further away from major livestock areas, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, for example. So
I'm surprised Texas isn't up there, other than the fact that it may not have been considered when they were doing this study in the states they picked.
now, if you were paying attention, Rich, I
Oh,
said
you said 10 states in the
upper Midwest.
Yep. No, I understand that. I'm just thinking that Texas might have just fallen in there someplace to say.
Yeah, Texas is its own little world.
Okay.
Everything figures out.
I understand what you said. I just was thinking.
I'm not covering Texas, so just drop it right now.
Yeah, okay.
Somebody put a muzzle on that guy. So anyway, this is another chart from that study. This is a number of percentage of towns on railroads had stock pens, but it also, we noticed here in North Dakota, 590 towns with stock pens, only 27 without. So this starts giving you the numbers of towns. In Iowa, we have a little over 1,000 towns in the state of Iowa in 1942. Almost 900 of them had stock pens of some sort. Now the next study, this is even more interesting, how many pens were at each of these locations. The vast majority were from 1 to 4 pens. We start getting up to the larger, what we might call a union stockyard or a major city stockyard that would have 10 or 20 or more pens, and you start seeing the numbers really dwindling. So, which indicates that these states that had just a few pens were often the shippers of livestock into the major cities, like whereas we go to Chicago or go to the state of Illinois, they had 9 locations that had 26 or more pens. Most of those were feed and rest stations leading into Chicago on railroads coming from the west. So Iowa also had 9. Ohio had 12. And that was probably feed and rest stations for livestock heading to the East Coast, primarily the New York City, Philadelphia, Boston markets. So, but look at how the large number of towns were just 2 pens. So that old Campbell kit you've had sitting on the shelf and couldn't decide what to do with is a perfect stockyard model for you to build and put on your layout. So, and this is the other interesting statistic that was found in here is the distance between towns on the lines of each railroad that had stock pens available. Less than 5 miles apart. When railroads were building west of Chicago, especially, they were putting up a water station about every 5 to 7 miles because that was a typical distance a 440 could go before it needed water again. And at almost every water stop, a stockyard was put up. And so you have many of these towns, again, you notice 5 to 15 miles, most of the stock pens were located within that distance. It's we start talking, 30 or 40 miles apart, you got very few towns, most of them again in those eastern, what I call east of the Mississippi states that were dealing far more with livestock traveling through the feed and rest stations. So, just to give you an example, when we talk how many railroads and towns, here's a map of Iowa from 1942 showing all the rail lines, and all these little black dots are stockyards in towns in Iowa. Iowa was pretty saturated with railroads at the time, and you can see just about every town had a stockyard, and many of them were very close together. Sometimes they even had 2 or more railroads in the same town. They each had their own stockyard facilities. And the reason for this was the black dots where livestock raised. These slashed dots are where the livestock tends to be consumed, or an area where there was a deficit of livestock. So you had all those livestock raised out here, channeling this is from 1935, the population base in the country at that time was centered about this area. And so you had livestock moving east, but you also see movements to the west as population centers were starting to grow out there. Here's a chart from 1922 showing the prominence of stockyards and the cities that handled the most livestock at the time. You'll see Chicago at the top, number 1, Kansas City number 2, number 3 was Omaha. We got East St. Louis. There's Dallas Fort Worth down there in Texas. They did raise some livestock down there. But,
Thanks, Doug.
yep. Now stuff the stock back in, guys, will you?
Can you back up one picture?
Oh, sure. Notice Texas has got a big black dot.
Yeah.
Yeah, the biggest black dot.
Yeah.
Probably Dallas, Fort Worth area. I know Fort Worth is a huge stock town.
Well, this is just looking at animals within the region or the state. You notice each state basically has a dot. And so you see they raised a lot of animals in Texas, and they were all going out of the state.
Yep.
Either to the west or up through Chicago to the east. So, and these were where the stockyards, the major stockyards were located. You see there's quite a few right here in Jersey City, had 7 different ones there outside of New York City. Philadelphia had a few, but again, the animals that were raised pretty much here, so they went to stock pens here and then started moving east. Now let's take a look here. This is a small town stock pen. This is Aledo, Illinois. If you're not sure where that's at, that's just east of the Mississippi River, a couple miles on a CB&Q branch line. These are some photos that Lee Russell took in 1937. We've got here's a farmer with his horse-drawn wagon, and he's got a crate in the back of the wagon. He's delivering a calf to the local stockyard. So And you can see the loading gate here. This one's got counterweights on it so they can raise the ramp to the height of whatever vehicle or wagon the animal's being delivered in. We also have trucks backing up to an unloading ramp. Here we got a farmer with hogs, and notice that he's double decked his truck, and he's got a fold down ramp there on the back of the stock truck body, and he's delivering hogs. And here the helpers at the stockyards with they're driving the hogs into, this is the alleyway leading to the scale house. I want you to also take note of, you're not seeing things, these are little black lines here because this stock pen was lined with brick. This was not a dirt pen, this had brick. There's a reason for that. I'll get to that in a minute. So here we're herding hogs into the scale house so that we weigh them so the farmer knows what the weight of his livestock is, and then he'll get a check for those animals if he's selling them. So here we are unloading cattle. Same thing. We've got a ramp coming down. Notice the ramp has got slats across it. That's, as you can see, the ramps tend to get coated with rather slippery material. And that's to keep the animals, to give them some sure footing as they're going up or down the ramps. So you do want to put sticks across there for, yeah. And again, the bricks. So here we are. This is also a Lido. These were all taken 37 by Lee Russell. You can clearly see the bricks defined here in the alleyways and the pens. That made it much easier to keep these clean, and cleanliness was also related to health. It kept down the disease. So here we are inside the building, the scale house and office. Got a fellow here probably waiting for his check or his weight ticket. Notice all the different calendars up on the wall, different railroads represented, etc. And the market prices for livestock posted up here on the blackboard. That way, someone bring in a load of hogs, they could look up there pretty quick and get an idea of what their load of hogs is worth. So now let's move out west. This is on the Santa Fe. This is Peach Springs, Arizona. Jack Delano photos from 1943 when he rode the Santa Fe out to the west. Both these fellows were photographers for the government during the Depression World War II period, and these photos are all available online in the Library of Congress. But here we've got a raised platform, wide boards, cattle coming off out of the stock cars and we'll see there's a sliding gate here. I'll explain that a little bit later. We've also got a lot of portable gates and supports here. Fellow up on top of the stock car, probably a brakeman, indicating to the engineer when to move forward so they could open another car up and unload it. So this is another Delano photo there at Peach Springs. Notice the light color of the boards. These probably have been whitewashed. Again, related to cleanliness, fighting disease. There's the wide board for the walk on the outside. Notice all the fence gates and rails are topped with a board, probably something like a 2x10, so that you could walk across the top of these. These posts tend to be round. You'll find posts are either round or square in stockyards. Every railroad had their own standards as to how the size of the post, how tall they were, their diameter or their square shape, how far apart they would be, and then also how many, what they called these boards rails, how many rails it would be, and the size of the rails. Notice here at the bottom, we got two that are very, very close together. That's to keep animals from digging through, particularly something like hogs. And then you get narrow boards further up, so you would have airflow through. So, here's on the CBQ. This is out in Colorado or in Wyoming, where we're loading sheep. Notice the fellow who's moving the sheep. He and another guy hanging on to a piece of canvas or muslin to kind of keep them bunched up at the gate and encourage them to go up the loading chute. And this is a double deck chute. These sheep are going up to the upper level, and then they'll cross over on top of these. The door of the car will be lined up right here, so they can be loading both levels at the same time. So this is Another shot, CB&Q shot, this is up in Montana. Notice, the fence boards, they're not as many as the Santa Fe was using. They tend to be a little bit further apart, but notice that it looks like they're using square posts, possibly even ties, old ties. And then notice here, we've got a full height rails on one side, but just a couple rails on the other side. These we call rub rails. And their intention was the livestock that would be in this pen here in the foreground, that would keep them from pushing through and pushing the boards off on the other side. It also would keep them from bunching up against one of these posts and then hurting, like breaking ribs on an animal by pushing them into the post. So these were considered rub rails. So you wouldn't have a full height of rail boards on both sides, but you would at least have a rub rail or two there to keep animals from pushing through. And you'll notice the same thing over here. The rub rails are just on the lower heights on this side, but full height on the other side of these posts. So, this is Chama, New Mexico. Few of you perhaps have been out there. The stock pens are still standing in Chama. This is an early shot on the Rio Grande. This is a double deck chute here, and take notice of this gate delivery system. You'll see that these two pieces are offset. That's so that this outer gate can slide into the inner gate and away from the car body. When the car is stopped, the workmen can come up, they can grab this gate and slide it out, so they have essentially a tight connection. And then there usually is a heavy iron rod with a sharpened point, will be fastened with a ring at the top of this post, and you jab that sharpened point down into the platform, and that would keep the animals from pushing that gate open. So this is Cimarron, Colorado. If you go out to Colorado and visit the national parks, there's one on the Gunnison River at Cimarron that has a stock car on display and a replica of the stock pens that were there. Again, here, notice the walkway, and we got the slats here so that the men working also do not slip. So, the fellow up here who basically observing the operations, and then again, this is a double deck chute. We got two sides going up. Sheep are going up here and crossing over into the car. Craig, Colorado, and the Rio Grande. We got hogs here as well as we got cattle. And notice the shed here for the hogs is just a low shed. Hogs do not sweat, and so they need shade, or they need a mud puddle. You got some hogs wallowing over here in a mud puddle, and you got a shed for them to get out of the sun. But notice the height of the shed. It's very shallow, basically just tall enough for hogs to get in there and a man to go in there and move the hogs out. It's not tall enough for someone to walk through or be on horse and go into. So notice the fellow over here walking on the walkway, elevated walkway over this way. So this is a Rio Grande shot. Notice here you can see the upper gate has slid out against the car. The lower gate slid back in. So you can see that distance and sheep coming off the car here. And you can also see the platform has again got cleats. And then right down here at the bottom, you'll see the little platform boards that they lay across the opening here. And that can be laid in this lower opening so the sheep don't have to jump over that. That exists. Here's another Rio Grande, but this is a single loading chute. We got one full-size gate that slides in and out. So, but this one looks like it could have a movable floor so that they could raise the ramp floor to get to the upper deck, because this is a double deck car sitting here. So that would be my guess, is that they've got a floor that can be raised up, and they just throw a heavy support board in here to hold that ramp in place. To get into large stockyard operations, this is Belfort, South Dakota, livestock changes. Photos in the early 60s. You can see the number of loading pens, overhead walkways. Look at all these chutes lined up here. So Belfort was the heart of South Dakota, near the Missouri River. A lot of cattle raised in the grasslands up there. So this would be a major shipping point. people keep asking me, what's this pile of stuff up here at the top? Well, that's bentonite. You can look that one up, but that's something that's important in various oil drilling, among other things. So let's see. The Dawson Cattle Company. This is along the M&L in Minnesota. What I want to point out over here, these are the loading chutes. But notice how they have been roofed over, coming up out of the what looks like a sale barn building. This would have a number of pens in here. Farmers have all come in. They're selling their cattle, livestock, and they're being loaded in the stock cars here. But because of the winter conditions up in Minnesota, they have incorporated the loading chutes into the building and have roofed them over. Here's a close-up detail shot of that loading chute and a small platform here. This is from 1934. So, very simple construction. Let's see, Chicago Northwestern, this is Jewell, Iowa. Notice we got the hog sheds here. We got a single loading chute. This would be the scale house over here. This is where the farmers would bring in their animals and unload them, run them into the scale house to get a weight, and then they could put them into these holding pens until they had a stock car parked here to be loaded. Notice that the railroad is not loading livestock, so they got a couple of Erie box cars stored here on the stock car track. So, oops, went backwards. This is Chicago Northwestern, Stafford, Iowa. Notice how high the fence rails are. And we've got Wrangler here on horseback, and then this guy in the hat and tie is probably a buyer. He's also on horseback, and he's looking over the animals to see what their condition is and how much then he is willing to offer to purchase them. Notice we've got some covered hog sheds up here over in this pen. We'll get the scale house here. This is, I think this is from the ICC valuation report, because this is a very early photo. This is on the Chicago Great Western in the town of what it was at that time known as Berlin, was renamed Lincoln in World War I. So this is an early photo, very early Great Western stock cars here. But what caught my eye is the guy standing up on top of this fence. The fence rail is laid, got a board up there, and they're standing up there, so they're up out of the muck of the stock pens, but they can observe or watch what's going on. We've got some hog sheds over here. It looks like we're running cattle up the ramp and into the car, and the gate is slid out. So not always did you have your chutes go up to the car. This is Lodi, Wisconsin. The stock pens are built up on top of the embankment, and the chute actually comes downhill to the cars. This is also a very early photo. Again, notice that they've been whitewashed, but the stock cars have got feed boxes on top. This is before the 1906 28-hour law, and when they were attempting to feed and water livestock in the cars as they're being moved, and that 1906 law basically outlawed this, and so these would be early stock cars from the 1880s, 1890s with the feed boxes on top. So here's another shot. These are loading sheep in Wisconsin in 1910. Again, we got hatches on the cars so they could drop feed and hay down in there. So these cars predate that 1906 date. We got a scale house here. We got some hog sheds here. Again, we got much smaller fence boards. We don't see 10s and 12s here. You see 8s and 6s probably. So, and we got round posts, and we got additions built up. So
That looks like in that picture that it's almost downtown if you go back other way.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
it's like the town's down on the upper end of the slide, and then you've got the stockyard. I know down in Hereford, Texas, I've been through there chasing trains on this Transcon BNSF line, and you know you're at Hereford before you get to Hereford. Because all of the huge stockyards down around the tracks and down around the community. So there's a huge stink to it. And you, like I said, you know you're there before you get there. And so.
True. Well, in the early days of laying out railroads, and of course, stock pens were important because that was the early ag commodities that were being moved.
Right.
The railroad depot would be right downtown, or the town would grow up around the railroad depot, and the stock pens were usually nearby. In
Right.
later years, stock pens would get rebuilt and they would be built out more to the edge of town. Another thing to look for is the location. Very typically, your stock pens were on the side of town closest to Chicago if you were west of the Mississippi. That way, a local coming through could quick drop down into the spur, pick up those loaded livestock cars and depart without any wasting of time. So you would have your turnouts to be on the east end going to Chicago, and the pens would usually be on the east end of town. That was also, on the windward side, you were away from the wind blowing through town, which was I've lived in towns where we had hog confinements on all four sides. It didn't matter which way the wind was blowing, you knew somebody was raising hogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, small town Iowa. Yeah. This is a shot in Lockwood, Ohio. What caught my eye was the Chicago Great Western car sitting there, but again, we got a double loading chute here, whitewash fencing at one time. So here's a color photos of stock pens are rather rare. This is a CB&Q stock pen. They did not whitewash theirs so much. They just let them weather gray, as you can see. And the CB&Q like to reinforce the sides of the loading chutes by running the post up, putting cross braces in. That was common with some railroads. So here's another color shot. These are stock pens. Now, this is in Illinois somewhere where they're running an excursion. All the rail fans and foamers sitting on the unused, and of course the standard CB&Q mineral red coloring on the probably the scale house there. So
Those are great northern cars behind the engines.
yes, that's of course this is in Illinois, so the CB&Q was handling all the great northern traffic from Minneapolis
Right.
to Chicago.
Right.
So, yeah, but take note that the posts are creosoted, so they've not weathered the same as the fence boards. So these could be bridge timbers or ties that are being used for rebuilding the stock pens. So, here's a photo I came across recently. This is Sully, Iowa, named St. L. And again, we got a fairly small stockyard. You can see the prominence of hogs in this area because you got 3 of the pens have got hog sheds. Then we got this more open pen. This is where the animals would come in and be delivered by the local farmers. And it's not roofed over, but this would be the scale right here. And they would come in, driven in here, be weighed, and then they'd be putting in a holding pen until they were delivered on in here to be loaded into stock cars. The other interesting thing I want to point out is we got an oil jobber here. This is very common in small towns. You have the stock pens, the oil jobber. Notice we're very close to the end of the siding. These could be coal bins or other storage buildings, and this photo is probably taken from the top of something like a grain elevator or maybe a water tower. So nothing else in town was that tall, not even the trees. So large feed and rest stations. This is Calumet City on the Indiana Harbor Belt, where you'd have just multiple stock chutes lined up. This is where you could unload or load multiple cars all at once. And here we are loading cattle into cars somewhere. Again, this is a feed and rest station, so you would have shelter. Animals had to be unloaded for a minimum of 6 hours, fed, rest, watered. If they'd been confined for 36 hours in the car, they had to be rested a minimum of 8 hours. So here we are loading sheep on a double deck Calumet City, and notice that this one, the upper chute is going right into the car. The lower chute is coming and crossing underneath, and then they go into the door by going in underneath. So notice the lettering. Every chute is marked, or every pen is marked. We get into the here Chicago stockyards. Huge facility. They covered a square mile when this was originally built. Each of these pens were leased or owned by different brokers, handlers of livestock. The cars would get unloaded. They would be unloaded into one pen. Then they would get transferred to another pen that was controlled by a certain broker or buyer, or maybe a slaughterhouse, or, you know, there you get into the complexity of these things. But you can just see these were huge facilities. This is a union stockyard in Salt Lake City. Notice the feed bunks here filled with hay. And the fellow sitting there watching them, and you get a lot of straw bedding on the ground. Here again is Chicago. We got nickel plate cars being lined up at the chutes, ready to be unloaded or loaded. Omaha was another huge facility. This is kind of a panoramic view of the stock pens at Omaha. I ran into a fellow one time who was trying to build this in N scale, a complete replica. I don't know how many sheets of 4x8 material he had for laying out. And he was scratch building it all. It was, I thought he was kind of crazy, but he was doing it for a museum display somewhere. Here we got South Omaha, lots and lots of sheep. Again, the hay bunks here, water troughs. Those are all important details that you need to include in your stock pens. And note that these hay bunks, you got slats so that sheep can stick their noses in and pull out a mouthful of hay. Another South Omaha shot. We got cattle being unloaded here. And then we got these little shacks up on top of the gates or on stilts, which I think these are probably just little shelters for all the workmen, and they handled so many livestock. These guys are just stationed along there. There's a little place where they could get in out of the weather, warm up, have a cup of coffee or something. You've got portable chutes here. These would be on wheels. They could be rolled up to a double deck car, so you could unload the upper deck. You've got a floor car height or car floor height platform all the way along here. So the chutes coming right off into the pens. And then these would be temporary pens, and as once these cattle were unloaded and accounted for, they would then be moved to another pen. So here we are in Omaha. This is 1925-27. Just take a look at the complex track work that's going on, the double switches here, the slip switches, and etc. And here you can see one of those double deck chutes, platform on the wheels on one end, so it could be rolled into place to unload that double deck. You've also got various portable fence gates, etc., leaned up against here. This was, and you can see where the chutes were by just looking at the coloring of the manure that's been dropped by animals as they're coming out of the cars. So another shot at South Omaha. You see the raised concrete platforms at the height of the car floors. Nice curve. Here we got a walkway going up into the slaughterhouses coming from the stock pens. But what's really intriguing with this photo is we're on the curve and we got this raised platform here on the outside of the tracks. Notice the pile of manure as well and the platform gates. But this raised platform, let's see if the boy from Texas can tell us what that is.
That'd be something they could look in the car to count as to make sure all the cattle are out or whatever from the backside.
Well, that's a good guess, and it probably was used for that purpose too. But mostly that was to so you could stand outside the car with a proper stick and encourage those cattle to leave that car. A cattle prod would stuck through the slats of the car side from someone standing on this platform, and you know, he didn't have to go into the car and fight those Texas Longhorns with their, you know, their spears on their heads. But yeah, that was to observe, but also to make sure the car was empty.
Do you think that the structure to the left in the picture there is going up to the processing plant? Would that be?
Yes. Yep. Well, it could be a road. It's pretty heavy. It looks a lot because it's got the slats on here. I would say it's for animals, livestock. So, but it could be a roadway, but I think it's more for livestock. Because typically the early slaughterhouses were 4 or 5 stories tall, and the kill floor would be on the top floor, so they could hang the animals on an overhead chain and use gravity to go through the process once
Right.
they had been slaughtered. So notice the overhead walkways in several locations. So I mentioned cattle buyers. Here we are in Los Angeles. Notice we got the Herald Commission Company. And so when Harold bought cattle that came in, they would be transferred to one of his pens. The other detail, notice is the platform with the bales of hay stacked up so that as animals came in, they could be fed right away. So, and of course, there's someone with his cattle whip and talking to one of the wranglers there. So this is probably a commission buyer standing here in his fancy pants. And this is Chicago. Notice the hogs and the bricks that way and the slats. This is a chute going up and overhead. So Winnipeg, 1918, raised platform. This was a wood platform. You can see the supports underneath, all whitewashed. A lot of hog sheds here. So, Los Angeles again, also raised platform. So let's see, early California SP, Whitehall, Vermont. Here's a model of this Whitehall, Vermont that somebody built and I found online. This is East Side Buffalo, New York. This is very likely a feed and rest station with all these stock chutes along the tracks there. Animals, of course, that's any stock pens. You had to provide care for them, which included feeding. So here we got farmers delivering hay to Chicago stockyards. And here we got in Denver, we get mules. So it wasn't just cattle and sheep, it was also animals that were moved through these mules, horses. So we got hay up here on the platform. They can't quite get to it. They can be tossed down to them. Of course, the animals had to be watered and fed. Hogs, you could actually water and feed into cars as long as they were at rest. So this is Calumet City. See a fellow using a hose here to fill the water troughs, and the hogs in there getting their rest. Here we are. This is in Milwaukee, somewhere out west, because we got overhead wire, and they're feeding and watering hogs on the Milwaukee. You can see the spilled corn on the platform. Hogs also had to be drenched to keep them cool. Again, I mentioned they didn't sweat. So every railroad that handled livestock had what they called hog drenchers. There were many different designs, but they basically sprayed water into the car. They would have a spot where they would move by slowly, and they would spray water in, partly to hose down the hogs, but mostly to wet the bedding, which would provide a cooling effect. The bedding typically was sand. Sometimes they used some railroads used cinders, but the owners didn't like it because they were at sharp edges and tended to damage livestock. In cold weather, there would be instructions to put hay in there, particularly with hogs, to protect them a little bit. But you can see basically these hog drenchers consisted of a big pipe that was flattened at one end to make a nozzle. They would be on a swivel so that this fellow back here could move them up and down as the cars went by, and he could be spraying water in. And if he was careful, he stood back far enough and he did not get wet himself.
Yeah, do it in a suit.
Yeah. Let's see, back up. I suspect this was a photo, or he could just be wearing one of those denim chore coats. With that photo, it's hard to tell. So, but here's a more typical, this guy's standing way back in his overalls, and this is on the northwestern, or New York Central in Rome, New York, and he's great big nozzles, and he's hosing down. These are Swift Livestock Express cars. So he's hosing down the hogs in the double-deck cars as they roll by slowly. This is out in Nevada. The Union Pacific established a fast route for hogs into Los Angeles from Nebraska, etc. And this is in a north of Las Vegas, and they were running triple-deck cars at that time, so they had automatic drencher set up to hose down the hogs. I've had people ask me what these little hoses here are for, or whole nozzles are for. I'm not real sure. So
Would it go to a water trough in the car, maybe?
no, because they found that didn't work.
Okay.
But you've got, and these levers, I think, are for shutters in the cars to open or close the shutters and the sides, so that in bad weather they could close the car down and protect the animals. But I'm not sure. I never have found out what these are, and they look like they could be they're drains of some sort. So you could drain off the but I don't know. We'll have to find someone who's a UP expert. Anyway, here's a drawing. This is from Milwaukee. You can see a very simple pipe. They, 2-inch black wrought iron pipe. They just mash down to one end to make the nozzle. It's mounted on a box. The control valve is down in the box to protect it from freezing. The Chicago Northwestern had something very similar. They used a 3-inch pipe and they made a nozzle out of it. They had their gate valve down here in the frost-proof box. A lot of times this stuff would be buried down in the ground. In northern countries, you got to get down in the ground to keep it from freezing. The other thing you had besides feeding animals, caring for them, you also had to remove the manure. This is the stockyards up in Minnesota, South St. Paul, and you've got guys whose job is going around all these pens, pecking up all the manure, and then they come up on this platform and they dump it into gons. And typically the gons of manure would be rolled out into the countryside somewhere, and they were sold to local farmers for fertilizer. So you had livestock coming in, you had fertilizer going out. And you would see they're using wagons here. You'd see 2-wheel dump carts. So in later years, you started seeing the early skid steers, bobcats, etc., bucket loaders and tractors for manure. So another problem was disease. Hoof and mouth disease especially was very costly to farmers in the stockyards. And so here we got a couple of probably vets hired on the staff of the stockyards who were checking out a couple of down cattle. Notice the brick walkway here has not been completed yet. But again, the brick was being laid down so it could be cleaned off and hosed off to prevent hoof and mouth disease, among other things. And they would use lime as a disinfectant. So that's the other reason for the whitewashing, the lime. And so these would be cleaned regularly, and they wanted a good surface it could easily be cleaned off. So cinders, sand, brick, concrete, asphalt, depending on how many animals are moving through and how often it happened. If it was only once a week, you might just put down sand or cinders. But if you were moving livestock through every day, you would want something more solid, like asphalt or brick. So, loading chute details. This is a Santa Fe stock pen. Here you can see that sliding gate, but here's that iron bar I was talking about. A sharpened point at this end. It was attached to this gate. The gate would be swung into place, and then you would just jam your foot onto the end of this bar and jam it into the wood. As animals come in and out of this car, they would lean against that gate. It wouldn't go anywhere because of that iron rail. And I've got one of those from the Rock-On stock pen. It's almost an inch in diameter. It's fairly heavy, about 4 feet long. So here we got one looking at the photographer going, well, I don't want my picture taken. But you can see these are pretty beefy construction. You're talking 6x8s, 8x10s, etc., for the beams and the cross pieces. So this is up in Saskatoon on the Canadian National. Again, on whitewash, you got to watch out for the horns. Loading sheep in Roswell, New Mexico in '57. Nice color shot. Eskridge, Kansas on the Santa Fe. Again, you notice the walkway here, the fellow, he's got a hose. So it's possible that he's disinfecting the animals that have come in. And here we got, you can just see the top of the water tank supplying the water. So he may be just watering, or he could be filling a water trough, but he could be disinfecting. It's hard to say because all those things happen. Here you can see where the animals would be driven in. The scale house would be down there. So this is a portable loading chute or rolling loading chute. This is in Santa Fe and Loma Linda, California. Taurus Models made a kit of this, and this chute was actually on rollers on rails. And it could be, once the car got spotted, it would be rolled out to be used to load and unload. And then when they were finished, they'd roll it back away and the car could depart. They only built a couple of these. So here's a portable ramp that's being used in, I have no idea, somewhere where it snows. And they've just set this up. They're using the snow fence partly and some wire fencing here to corral the animals a little bit to get them to go up the chute and into the cars. This is a nickel plate drawing for a portable ramp. Almost all the historical societies have now published drawings. So if you're wanting to build stock pens, you can probably find drawings from your favorite railroad or a neighboring railroad to get an idea of what gives you all the fence sizes and size of beams and posts, etc. So here's a portable chute. This is typical what most farmers would have on their farms for loading trucks, but they sometimes you use them at the rail loading sites as well. But here's a model was built by Les Brewer of an early portable loading chute. So I like this photo because the chute is completely aligned, so those horns cannot get out of there as they're loading these. They must be Texas Longhorns that somehow got mislocated, right? This is Walker, South Dakota. So here we got an NP, Northern Pacific. Again, this fellow standing up here, he's using what's called a slap. They were a canvas device that they could use to slap cattle. Wouldn't hurt the cattle, would not bruise them or damage the hides, but it would encourage them to keep moving. And the federal government published a booklet that gives you instructions on how to make that slap out of canvas. So again, here's that MP stockyard and the details. Notice the angles, heavy bolts here holding this all together. Another shot of that stock pen. How are we doing on time? Oh, we got to keep moving here. NP loading. This is out in Montana. Notice the overhead lights so they could load at night. And this is one of those adjustable ramps. You could raise it and lower it for doing the upper deck as well as the floor level deck. Cody, Wyoming, more sheep loading in the 30s. Utah and the Rio Grande. We get 3 chutes here with 3 separate platforms, the steps going up, and then you got a narrow walkway going between the platforms. These platforms typically were about 16 feet long, tended to be about 6 feet wide, maybe 8 feet wide, depending on how the chute was built next to the tracks. The wing gates here on hinges, they could be folded back out of the way, then they could be swung out and then extended as need be once the car was spotted. Here we are in Texas on the SP. I did get a Texas photo in here. There you go, Rick.
Thank you.
Yep, here we are loading horses, and notice the oil jobber right next to it. So that was very common. Canada, whitewashed, 1958. This is an Amazano and Newburgh Island aerial photo. Again, we've got the hog sheds here, the scale house, the loading chute going out between we only got 4 pens for holding and 1 pen for gathering. So loading calves. Oh, here's nope, I thought I saw a detail, but no, I don't see it. Notice the round posts have been cut off on an angle. That's so the water and ice wouldn't sit there and soak into the post, but they don't have any overhead support structure. So they're depending on these posts to keep the sides in place. This is out in Oregon, 1900. There's the scale house. You got kind of a guide. This would be a holding pen. They could run the cattle sheep through here and then put them into the pens, and they unloading. Was a floor level of Chicago. Here in Chicago, you can see where they're using that portable ramp to unload, to load sheep up on the upper deck. Here's another portable ramp. This one's got some sides attached to it. Just metal braces and probably a piece of sheet metal here would be my guess. Here's one without any sides. Even doing that with hogs, and you notice the slats, and the hogs are not sure they want to come down, but they're doing it. Overhead walkways, feed bunks, water troughs, these are all details that are important. Denver, notice the paved walkway there. Cattle for Swift up in Canada.
All that livestock seemed to respond better to somebody who's dressed in nicer clothes and a tie and things like that, standing there directing them, if you've noticed that in the pictures.
Yes, I'm glad you're paying attention. So. Of course, all this livestock had to be weighed. Scale houses were very, very important. This is St. one in Mason City, usually used to weigh reefers full of meat coming out of the slaughterhouse. Here's the interior of a typical scale house. You got the balance beam and the weights and the fellow who's got the microphone telling them what to do. So here's a drawing for a Santa Fe 10-ton stock scale. Basically, you had a balance beam type scale. You had a platform with, this has got 2-inch by 12-inch planking on the platform. And you drive in a group of animals, 10, 12, 15 animals, you get a weight on them, and off they would go. Here's a Chicago Northwestern scale house. Scale platform is 8 by 14, 6 by 14. I'd have to blow that up more to see it, but gives you an idea. It's just a covered building inside, and they would have this scale here. So moving livestock, was almost always at the head end of the train to reduce the injury from slack action. So you might have a full train of stock cars, or you might just have half a dozen stock cars at the head of the train. Here we are at Terra in Iowa, the Illinois Central. There's some more stock trains, even more. Notice this car has been what's called paper. In really bad extreme weather, they would line the interior of the stock car with heavy paper or thin cardboard, and they would cover the door over. And this would keep, those of us who live up north know what wind chill is, and this would reduce the wind chill for those that were traveling in those open cars. So people ask how many animals can you get into a car. This chart was pretty standard. Almost every railroad followed the same chart. This came from the Union Pacific Livestock Shipping Guide and Directory in 41. But if you're looking at say 1,200 pound steer, which is about a market ready steer, you're going to get 23 of those animals in a 40-foot car, only 22 in a 36-foot car. With hogs, market ready in the 40s, 250 pounds, you're going to get 68 in the 36 car, 76 in a 40-foot car. With sheep, the numbers a little bit more. A double deck, figure about 8 or 10 less animals on the upper deck, just because of the mechanism that was needed, took some space. And it was especially crucial in hot weather. So. Here we got a bunch of stock cars just parked on the elevator track up in South Dakota, probably waiting to be loaded somewhere or stored for the moment. Of course, livestock was handled on even the interurbans. This is Mason City, the Mason City and Clear Lake. We got some stock cars and refrigerator car. They did all the transfer work between the Minneapolis and St. Louis, and then the Chicago Northwestern, Chicago Great Western, and Rock Island and Mason City. So anything that came in for the Decker plant would probably, on one of those railroads, was handled by the trolley, taking it over to the M and St. L. Here we got, this photo is 1912, and the lower one is about 1934. We get the same motor doing the same work, stock cars and reefers. So I love this one. This is M and St. L. We have passenger run. We got the nice fluted bed car, and then we got wait for it. A switcher's tacking a stock car on the end of this nice fluted bud car. So,
Don't back up.
yep. That tells you the priority of passengers on the M and St. L. And of course, farmers brought animals to be loaded in all kinds of ways. Here we got a bobsled with a couple of hogs. This is up in Vermont. I love this photo. Loading Seaboard Western airplane, getting calves loaded. This could be a heifer project where they're shipping animals overseas after World War II to help replenish the European, and then heifer still is doing work like this. So, but this was a common thing. So here we got one in Florida. What I like is these calves are coming off of a double door Wabash automobile car that's had a deck built inside and a post. And these are cattle coming from the boxcar right into the airplane. So if you want to model it, I got a photo. So here's what these stock cars look like inside. Here's a load with hogs. Notice this car is all whitewashed. This was a common Canadian CP and the CN both tended to whitewash, again, to prove to the livestock handlers their cars were clean and free of disease. This is a rather unusual load. This is a Southern Pacific gone. Actually, it's not a gone. It's a flat car with what's a sugar beet rack. And they've loaded the sugar beet rack with sheep. Now, I don't know. I'm not sure how they got in there. These sugar beet racks had hinged doors on the sides that were hinged to the top to allow the sugar beets to slide out. So I don't know if that's how they put the sheep in and out of there or not. These racks were removable, but I doubt that they removed them to put the sheep in or out. So very unusual photo. So this one's unusual because they're not normal livestock. They're moving elk. Loading elk into an SP car to be relocated to Stockton National Park, I think is what the situation was. And not always are stock cars used for livestock. Here we got melons lined up ready to be cantaloupe being loaded in stock cars to be shipped. The stock, anything that can handle weather could be carried in a stock car. So you might have things like pig iron ingots, ties, things like melons, etc. Just that was common. So
Yeah, watermelons are common.
yep, watermelons are very common. So farmers bringing animals into the local sale barns, loading chutes, stock pens. So, and of course the railroads were experimenting with how can we get it off the trucks and on the rails. Here we get a shot in Nebraska where they're just backing a livestock truck right up to the stock car on a siding somewhere, not even bothering with a stock pen or a loading chute. So this experiment lasted briefly. Also, livestock movements started shifting from rail to truck, sometimes fairly early. Here's some charts I found, again, government statistics. You can see in 1916, this is showing the percentage moved by trucks, or what they call drive-in drop-offs. By 46, the percentage was fairly high, particularly for cattle and hogs. Hogs especially because they tended to be raised within fairly close proximity to slaughterhouses. So a lot of hogs moved by truck by the end of the war. So and then also by these are public markets. The percentages that were driven, Chicago in 1946, 59% of the cattle were coming in by truck, 44% of the hogs. Sheep and lambs, they weren't raised too close to Chicago. They were coming in from those western grasslands, so they tended to move more by rail. But it's interesting. Here's Indianapolis, 89% of sheep and 94% of hogs came in by truck. This one surprised me, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. This is getting out in those western grasslands. But look at this, 99% of the hogs came in by truck, 97% of the cattle, even 90% of the sheep came in by truck in 1946. So just some interesting statistics. Of course, if you're in the truck models, you have all kinds of different contraptions for moving livestock. This is reminiscent of the Sylvan models out of Canada. Has got a nice resin livestock trailer with laser cut sides that looks just like this trailer. So if you need a livestock trailer, go to Sylvan. So I found the photos early on before the internet were really hard to find. This is my wife looking at the stock pens at Chama on our first trip out there. We found that one standing. And here's the double deck loading chute, well weathered. This has since been repaired and updated by the friends of the railroad there. So booth. This is a photo of Rock Island pens in Wilton, Iowa from 1928. See the hog sheds there and the walkway to the loading chute. This is the stock pens that I've got the iron bar from, and a few other. When the town of Wilton decided to tear it down and bulldoze it, we got permission to go up and take off any parts from the hardware we wanted. We got some. This is what it looked like when we were taking parts off. It was in pretty sad shape. This was their hog shed. This was the scale house. And this was a water supply, all buried in the brush. This is Mechanicsville, Iowa, on the northwestern main line. Loading chute, like Kaiser photos. Again, a double deck loading chute. This is Luana, Iowa, Milwaukee, northeast Iowa. This one I like. This is Croton, Iowa. This is clear down in the southeast corner of Iowa, almost to Keokuk. And what we've got stock pens here, but we got farmers are bringing in hedge posts, and they're getting ready to load the train coming here to where they can load up and sell their hedge posts they cut from their farms. So here's that Sully photo again. I didn't realize that there, and then twice up. Emmitsburg, this is one that had a movable ramp inside, so you can see the counterweights here for raising and lowering. This is a drawing of one of those double deck loading chutes from Grinnell, Iowa, M and St. L. Again, the counterweight, so you could raise the ramp up, and you would slide support boards underneath it once it was raised in position. ICC valuation reports. You will find sketches of stock pens with all the details and information. This is M and St. L. Grinnell from 1918. Notice the posts around 6 inches by 9 feet. They were pine, 6 feet on center. Alleyways are brick. How many hot water hydrants, the sheds, 5-ton scale. So if you can get I've got ICC valuation reports for most of the railroads in Iowa and stock pens, so I can provide you with more detailed information if you need to. Here's the northwestern of Maple River. You can see a sketch again, the sheds, flatware. They had 6 rails out of pine. They used 6-inch round cedar posts, so they tended not to rot like the pine posts. They had a corn crib, a tank and a well, sand bin. Here's some photos from ICC reports. These are all Illinois Central. So you can see you can go find this stuff. These are for Iowa ICC reports. Rhinebeck, Iowa, Whiting, Iowa, just south of Sioux City, and then Ankeny, Iowa. Here's of course, the ICC reports varied quite a bit depending on who the man in the field was and what his skills were for drawing. This is Durant, Iowa, but then here's a Sanborn map showing the location of the stock pens in Durant, Iowa. So it gives you an idea. It pretty kind of matches what this guy drew. There's the loading chutes. Let me get back up there. There's the loading chute here, and then you can see where the loading chute and platform comes up to the tracks. And then here's the scale house, and so the scale house would be over here. So I get, and the 2 sheds. He shows sheds drawn, so you can get a pretty good idea if you do the research and find stuff. Company plans. This is Milwaukee. What surprised me is they were using 1925. They were using wire fencing instead of board rails, and they're what they call a chafe board, or a rub board as I called it, but that gives you an idea, and all the details. Here's a drawing for a hog trough on the Milwaukee. lot of, like mentions, historical societies have published a lot of drawings. So these are available. These are Santa Fe drawings from one of their books. Here's their adjustable loading chute. In Chicago Northwestern, here's a concrete watering trough with the drain pipe. Here's CBHU stockyard plan. You notice that the posts here are 5 foot 4 inches apart instead of 6 feet apart. So they could run a single 16-foot board across 3 posts or 4 posts, and then the designs of the manger or hay shed. So, okay, models. So this is the Walters kit. The Walters kit gives you 2 loading chutes and 4 pens. You can combine them into a longer one. Was that a comment?
No,
Okay, here I've combined 1.5 kits into a little bit larger with 3 loading chutes, and you notice just a hint of, this is some brick, plastic brick that I've run down the alleyway for a brick. I've cut these chutes down, or the sheds, hog sheds in the Walter kit were too tall, so I shortened them. So here you can see how tall it is. This is a single pin from the same, this is the other part of that where I kit bash. And I let kids play with my hogs. So I had a fellow stood here for about 6, 7 years old, and he took all my hogs and put them outside. But you can get an idea. This is a nice kit. So, of course, you find all kinds of things. I don't know where the heritage of this kit, but I just had enough space along the edge of the layout. I could just get the chute in and a little bit of the fencing. I need to give it a good coat of paint when I find it again in the unpacking. I'll do that. But you can see some cattle and a hog, and of course the wranglers with the horses, and somebody's got a truck here ready to unload a bull. You can do little scenes like this pretty easy. This was an early scratch build attempt when there were not too many kits were available. The moves have been rough on it, and I can tell you all the things that are wrong with it. But you know, you get vertical posts and horizontal rails or boards. So this is a really nice laser cut stock chute from GLC. This platform actually hinges, and it actually moves and folds back up into the loading chute. This was a common loading chute out east. Pennsylvania, Western Maryland, others often had loading chutes like this with a platform that would fold down once the car was spotted. And if you don't want to scratch, chutes are more of a challenge to scratch build. Buy the chute kit, then you can scratch build the pens to go with it, or just put this on the edge of the layout. So here's the Lifelike kit, which is not too bad, especially once it's been painted and weathered down. You can see I lost a gate, it didn't get painted, so there's what the actual color of the plastic looks like. I finally found the gate stuck on there. But this is not a bad. Of course, the Walters kit, the gates, the swing gate slides hinge and slide in and out. The Lifelike one does not, but it's suitable. Here's one that someone was selling on eBay, and what I like was the details. They've added. We got an outhouse here. We got water trough in there. You can see the manure spread on the loading chute. You got a hay shed over here with a platform, and somebody's delivering some hay. So there's some things you can do with fairly inexpensive kits. This was a nice job someone did of just a couple loading chutes right on the edge of their layout. You don't have to do the pens at all. They just got a little bit of fencing in there and did the loading chutes. So this is one Dwayne Buck of the Burlington Historical Society built this a number of years ago. It was for sale online of a Great Northern stockyard that he had built. He has since passed away, but just a wealth of detail in something like this with the scale house and the office and the feed bunks and things. So here's some shots I found online. This looks like it could be could be a Campbell kit, it could be scratch build, I'm not sure. Here's a nice one where we've got the double deck loading chutes that are roofed. And then here's the open stock pens that go with it. And here's a close up with some animals in there now. These are, gosh, there's a guy named David Gunn. Are you familiar with him?
Oh. David Gunn, eh?
Yeah.
Eh?
He lives out in the far eastern lands of Canada, and he's building one of those large stock pen operations with a slaughterhouse next to it. And you see, he's doing just a really nice job. I really like what he's done here. It's all scratch built. Um, and then as I was looking at his photos, I suggested he needed a ramp going up to the top of his slaughterhouse. You notice it's not there, but then he sent me some later photos and he's put the ramp in. He's also done some things with water troughs.
It's a long winter in Nova Scotia.
Yeah. Well, if you live in hot and humid summer territory, it makes some wonderful modeling time in the summer too, especially if you have a basement. So, but yeah, David he's done a very, very nice job. I compliment him on the work he's done here, and his slaughterhouse is there in the background. So thank you, David, for sending me the photos. Now, for sources of information, as I mentioned, the Historical Societies of Santa Fe published this book a number of years ago. Difficult to find, but it's still available once in a while. This Burlington Historical Society published this one, number 25. You find it on eBay once in a while. Of course, Kalmbach, Jeff Wilson published the Livestock and Meatpacking Industry Guide. It's not as detailed as I would like, but it's got good basic stuff. Then more recently, Steve Sandifer published this wonderful book on Santa Fe livestock operations. It's focused on Santa Fe, but will answer tons of questions, tons of photos, even down to the bedding they use and things. So then you've got Danielle Pate has published 2 books on the Fort Worth stockyards and livestock hotels, as they were called. Just has published a new book that just was published like in the last week, is coming out. I've got one ordered to my local bookstore. And then Sioux City Stockyards, Marcy Poole did a book on the Sioux City Stockyards and also interviewed employees. And there was a CD recording of her interviews. Also, it was only available through the local visitor center in Sioux City, but I happened to get copies of that. So there is stuff out there and you can find it. So I thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Doug,
Very
if you ever get out to Socorro, New Mexico, which is on the highway between Las Cruces and Albuquerque, if you go west there on a highway, like you're going to go out to the big radio telescopes that scan the stars, there's a big stockyard still built out there that, at least it was the last time I was out there, that you can go by and see. It's fairly large, and again, it's out in the open area of New Mexico, but it's west of Socorro, New Mexico. So
yeah, in the western states that were very dry, where you didn't have the weather or the snow and moisture that just caused all that wood to rot. And some of them are still standing. So yeah. So
well, thanks for all the detail on the stockyard stuff and the things that need to be built or added on to the kits and the modeling ideas for for those who are really into in-depth and stuff for that. So thank you very much for that. And also for the showing of David Gunn's operation and what he's done. And again, he's doing a beautiful job up there in Nova Scotia. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to be there in June and send back live feeds from David's basement, him and I, to Division 9.
Sure.
Thank you.
yeah, I've got a few more photos of just drawings, all kinds of different stuff from different rows. I've collected all this stuff through the years. Some of it's been published in magazines, some not. Here you can see this is the Penzi. Notice how this is hinged with a counterweight, pulled back up into the chute, like that one that GLC did. There's a portable ramp. And then the stock cars. I didn't touch on stock cars at all, but just a few photos. Poultry cars. Gosh, they exist. Look at that. Different kinds. Double deck car here, bull board there on the Evanston car. Just some of them were quite colorful. Others were pretty plain. Here's an early attempt at feed and watering cars in transit. This car is from the 1880s. So there's another Hicks stock car again with feed troughs, water troughs. Here's some Northwestern cars with the feed bunks. There's a double deck car with a load of hogs. Northwestern had stock cars, the interior of one. Rio Grande, Milwaukee, SP, Northwestern. The stock cars were still fairly common up into the early 70s. The last livestock movements were in 96 on the UP, going to Farmer John's and Ventura, no, in Vinton, California, south of Los Angeles. So,
And there's a few of those still in museums and the
Oh,
outdoor
yes.
displays that you
Yeah.
could see.
here's the cars that were used on that special UP train. They were double deck, built out of 60-foot box cars. So, or I should triple deck, I meant, yeah. And of course, the 86-foot pig palace that MP built for a short while. And again, that's it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Doug.
Oh,
All right.
happy to do it. So I don't know if you have any questions.
I think we're all over.